My name is Arden Harmon. I'm 31 years old. 3 weeks ago, I opened an email on my laptop in a hotel room in uptown Charlotte. It was an invitation to a charity gala. My sister's gala. I almost deleted it. Then I saw the event website linked at the bottom. I clicked it. I scrolled past the photos, past the donor tiers, past the sponsorship packages, and then I stopped. There, under a section titled Our Inspiration, was a paragraph about a young woman who had, quote, lost everything to a failed business venture. A reminder, the website said, of why this work matters. There was no name. But there was a photo, my photo, a candid shot from a family dinner last November. Me looking tired, looking far away. My sister had taken it without asking. I remembered that night. I had just closed a $2 million funding round. I was exhausted, the good kind of exhausted. The kind that comes from building something real. She had no idea. None of them did. I read the paragraph once, twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney. But before I tell you what happened next, what I did, what my sister's face looked like when she finally understood, let me take you back to where this really started. 'Cause this wasn't about one photo. This was about years of being erased, quietly, carefully, by the people who were supposed to know me best. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoyed this story. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop a comment below. Now let me take you back to where it all started. I grew up in a house on Selwyn Avenue in the Myers Park neighborhood of Charlotte, North Carolina. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard with a magnolia tree my mother had planted the year before I was born. From the outside, it looked like exactly what it was: a comfortable home, a stable family, a life with no obvious cracks. The cracks were on the inside. There were 4 of us. My father, Neil Harmon, was a professor of economics at UNC Charlotte. He was the kind of man who believed that the most important thing a person could have was influence, not money, not talent, not kindness. Influence. The ability to walk into a room and change its temperature. He valued people who could do that. He admired them. He collected them in a way, the way other men collected watches or cars. My sister Jade could do that. From the time she was 8 years old, Jade Harmon could walk into any room and own it within 5 minutes. She was bright and magnetic and effortlessly charming in the way that some people simply are, the way that cannot be taught. Teachers loved her. Neighbors adored her. My father looked at her and saw everything he had always wanted to be. My mother, Cora Harmon, was the kind of woman who measured her own worth by the rooms she was invited into. She volunteered for every charity board in the Myers Park neighborhood. She chaired fundraising committees. She knew which families mattered and which ones didn't. And she had decided early on that Jade was her entry point into every room she had ever wanted. I was not that. I was quiet. I was methodical. I liked systems and patterns and problems that had solutions. I spent my afternoons in the school computer lab when other kids were at soccer practice. I liked building things not with my hands, but with logic, with code, with structure. My father called it being in your own world. He didn't mean it as a compliment. The first time I understood what I was to this family, not who, but what I was 14 years old. It was a Saturday morning in March, and I was standing in the gymnasium of Piedmont Middle School with a white ribbon pinned to my blazer. First place. North Carolina State Science Fair Junior Division. My project was a prototype application for tracking medication schedules in elderly patients. Something I had built from scratch over 4 months using a borrowed laptop and every free tutorial I could find online. My parents were there. I had seen them in the audience during the award ceremony. My mother had waved. My father had nodded. Afterward, in the parking lot, a woman I didn't know stopped my mother and said, "Your daughter just won the whole state. You must be so proud." My mother smiled, the kind of smile she had practiced for rooms like this one. "We are," she said. "Both our girls are doing so well. Actually, Jade, our older one, was just elected student body president at her high school. She has such a gift for people." The woman nodded politely. My mother talked about Jade for 4 more minutes. I stood beside her holding my first place ribbon. She didn't mention the project once. I told myself it didn't matter. I almost believed it. That pattern repeated itself for the next 17 years with a consistency that was almost impressive. Every achievement I reached became an opportunity for my parents to redirect the conversation toward Jade. My honor roll became a transition. My AP scores became a footnote. My acceptance to the engineering program at UNC Charlotte. Full merit scholarship, one of 12 awarded that year, was announced at the dinner table on a Tuesday night. My father said, "That's good news." My mother said, "Pass the salt, please." 2 weeks later, Jade was offered an entry-level communications role at a nonprofit in Charlotte. My mother called her book club to share the news. My father posted about it on Facebook, 47 reactions, 11 comments. "So proud of our Jade," he wrote. "She was born to make a difference. I learned to celebrate quietly. I learned to need less. I learned to take up less space in rooms where I was never going to be the point." And then I graduated. 4 years, Dean's List every semester, a 4.0 GPA in my final year, a capstone project that my department chair later called the most technically sophisticated undergraduate work I have reviewed in 20 years. There was no dinner. My mother had spent the week before my graduation helping Jade prepare materials for a new communications campaign at her nonprofit, the one Jade had just been promoted to direct. It was important work, my mother explained. Jade was making a real difference. The morning of my graduation ceremony, my father sent me a text message. 7-word. "Congrats. Keep working. You'll find your footing." I stood in the parking lot of the Halton Arena in my cap and gown reading those 7 words. Around me, families were taking photos, fathers were crying, mothers were holding flowers. Mine were not there. I took a photo of myself in the parking lot. The magnolia trees behind the arena were blooming. I looked at my own face in the screen for a long moment. Then I put my phone in my pocket and walked inside, alone. 2 months later, my parents threw a dinner at the Capitol Grill in South Park for Jade's promotion to Director of Communications. 60 guests, white candles, a jazz trio in the corner. My father gave a toast that lasted 7 minutes. My mother wore a new dress. People clinked glasses and said, "To Jade," over and over, "To Jade." I attended. I sat at table 4 near the back. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I clapped when the room clapped. On the drive home, I made a decision. Not about my family, not about Jade, about myself. I had an idea I had been carrying for almost 2 years, an application that could do what my science fair project had only sketched the outline of. A real system. A comprehensive platform for managing complex medication protocols in patients with chronic conditions. Something that could genuinely change outcomes for millions of people. I had been waiting for what I wasn't sure. Permission maybe, or acknowledgement, or just someone to tell me I was worth the risk. That night, I stopped waiting. I didn't know it then, but that decision made quietly alone on a Tuesday night in my apartment on Commonwealth Avenue would set in motion everything that followed, including the night my sister would stand on a stage and use my name to raise money she had no right to raise. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I launched ClearDose in January of 2019 out of a 600 square foot apartment on Commonwealth Avenue in Charlotte. No office, no investors yet, just a secondhand desk, 2 monitors, and a whiteboard I had taped to the wall above the kitchen counter because there was nowhere else to put it. I worked 16 hours a day for the first 8 months. I taught myself back-end architecture on weekends. I cold emailed 312 hospital administrators before I got my first meeting. I ate rice and beans 4 nights a week because rent was $1,200 a month, and I had exactly that much left after bills. I told no one in my family what I was building. Not because I was hiding, but because I already knew what they would say. I had heard the tone before, that careful, measured skepticism wrapped in the language of concern. Are you sure that's realistic? Have you thought about what happens if it doesn't work out? There's no shame in taking a stable job, Arden. I didn't want those words inside my head while I was building, so I kept the walls up. I told my mother I was doing consulting work. I told my father I was exploring options. I told Jade nothing because Jade and I had not had a real conversation in over a year. That was how things stood in November of 2021 when I drove to my parents' house on Selwyn Avenue for Thanksgiving dinner. I had just signed the term sheet for my first institutional funding round. $300,000 in seed capital from a healthcare-focused venture firm in Raleigh. It wasn't a lot by industry standards, but it was real. It was official. It meant someone who reviewed hundreds of pitches every year had looked at what I built and decided it was worth betting on. I sat across from my sister at the dinner table that night, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet pride. The kind that doesn't need an audience. Jade arrived 40 minutes late with a bottle of wine and an apology that managed to sound like a compliment to herself. She had been at a planning meeting, she explained, for the nonprofit's biggest campaign of the year. Very demanding, very important work. My mother nodded the way she always nodded when Jade spoke, with her whole body leaning slightly forward as if every word deserved to be caught before it hit the floor. We were halfway through the meal when Jade turned to me. "So are you still doing that little app thing?" she asked. She said it the way someone might ask if you were still taking pottery classes, casually, without particular interest. "Yes," I said. "It's going well." "Dad said it's been, 2 years, and you still haven't made any real money from it?" I looked at my father. He was cutting his turkey. He didn't look up. "Startups take time," I said. "That's how the model works." Jade tilted her head. That small practice tilt she had been perfecting since middle school, the one that said, "I'm being patient with you." "Of course," she said. "I just think it's important to be realistic. Not every idea is meant to scale. There's no shame in knowing your limits and going back to something more stable. Right, Dad?" My father set down his fork. He looked at me with the expression he reserved for students who had missed the point of the lecture. "She's not wrong," he said. "Risk management matters." My mother reached over and touched Jade's hand. "Jade is just looking out for you, honey." I picked up my glass of water. I took a slow sip. I set it back down. "I appreciate that," I said. That was all I said. Because the term sheet was in my bag in the front hallway. $300,000. and not one person at that table would have believed it. I drove home that night and sat in my car outside my apartment building for 22 minutes. The heat was running. The windows were fogging. I stared at the steering wheel and thought about all the things I hadn't said. Then I went upstairs and got back to work. 6 months passed. Clear doughs grew. I brought on June Okafor as my CFO, a sharp, no-nonsense financial mind I had met at a healthcare tech conference in Durham. We signed our first hospital partnership in April, then a second one in June. The platform was working, patients were using it, outcomes were improving, the data was undeniable. I wasn't paying attention to Jade's social media. I had unfollowed her accounts 2 years earlier, not out of anger, just out of self-preservation. Seeing her life curated and celebrated in real time had a way of pulling me somewhere I didn't want to go. So I didn't see the post when it first went up. It was a Tuesday afternoon in May when my phone buzzed with a message from a college friend named Dana Kowalski, whom I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. "Hey, are you okay? I saw what your sister posted. I didn't know things had gotten that bad. Just checking on you." I read it once. I read it again. I had no idea what she was talking about. I pulled up Jade's organization page, scrolled back several days, and there it was. A post. Beautifully designed, as all of Jade's content was clean. Typography? Soft colors, a photograph of 2 hands clasped together. The caption told the story of a young woman in our own community who poured everything she had into a dream only to watch it fall apart. It spoke of resilience and struggle and the importance of support systems. It used words like heartbreak and starting over and the courage it takes to keep going. It did not use my name, but it described my industry, my timeline, the city I lived in, the age I had been when I started, the relationship I had with a family member who had always believed in the mission, even when the results weren't there. Anyone who knew us would have known exactly who it was about. The post had 412 likes, 87 comments, donors responding with messages like, "This is exactly why your work matters," and "Thank you for sharing something so personal." One person wrote, "Your dedication to your family's story is so moving, Jade." Jade had replied to that one, "Thank you, it's close to my heart." I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time. I was not broke, I was not struggling, I was not starting over. I had just renewed a lease on expanded office space in the Noda neighborhood of Charlotte. I had a team of 9 people. I had a product that worked, and my sister had taken the outline of my life, the parts she had misread, the parts she had never bothered to ask about, and turned them into content, into engagement, into donations for her organization. She had built a story out of my silence. And the worst part wasn't the post itself. It was what I found 3 days later when I looked more closely at the organization's website and saw exactly how far this had already gone. The organization's website had a page called Our Story. I had never looked at it before. I had no reason to. Jade's nonprofit, a women's empowerment organization she had built over 4 years called Elevate Charlotte, was not something I followed closely. I knew it existed. I knew it had grown. I knew my mother talked about it at every family gathering, the way other mothers talked about grandchildren. I clicked over through the page slowly. There was a section near the bottom, a subsection titled, "What Drives Us?" Listis. And inside that section, embedded between a photo of Jade at a ribbon-cutting ceremony and a quote from a local city council member, was a paragraph I had to read 3 times before I fully understood what I was looking at. It described a woman, no name, but the details were specific enough to be unmistakable to anyone who knew our family. A younger sister, a tech venture, years of effort with no visible return. A family that had stood by helplessly watching someone they loved struggle in silence. The paragraph ended with this sentence: "Her story is the reason we do this work. Her resilience, even in the face of failure, reminds us that every woman deserves a community that believes in her." Jade had built an entire section of her organization's public identity around a version of my life that did not exist. A version where I had failed, where I was still struggling, where my story was a cautionary tale dressed up as inspiration. And she had never asked me, not once, not a text message, not a phone call, not even a passing mention of Thanksgiving. She had simply decided what my story was and published it. I closed my laptop. I went for a walk around the Noda neighborhood for 40 minutes. I passed the mural on North Davidson Street that I'd walked past 100 times. I bought a coffee I didn't drink. I stood on the sidewalk outside my office building and looked up at the second floor window where my team was working and thought about all the hours that had gone into what we had built. Then I went back inside and said nothing to anyone. That was a Thursday. On Saturday morning, my mother called. "Arden, honey, I need a small favor." "What?" Her voice had the particular lightness it always carried when she wanted something. "The renovation estimate came in higher than we expected. We're just a little short this month. Could you transfer us $3,000? We'll pay you back after the holidays." I had heard some version of this request before. Over the past 3 years, I had quietly transferred money to my parents on 4 separate occasions. Small amounts, enough to help without making it a conversation. I had never mentioned it to anyone. I had never asked for anything in return. "Of course," I said. I transferred the money that afternoon. 1 week later, I was having lunch with June at a restaurant on 7th Street when she mentioned almost in passing that she had seen a post on Elevate Charlotte's social media, a behind-the-scenes photo. Jade at a venue walkthrough for the upcoming gala. A beautiful space chandelier lighting round tables. A stage at the front. "Looks expensive," June said. "Where do you think they got the funding for a venue like that?" I set down my fork. I already knew. I didn't say anything to June. But I drove past the Westin Charlotte on my way home that evening and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes looking at the building. The $3,000 my mother had asked for the renovation that never seemed to get done had paid for the deposit on my sister's gala venue. No one had asked me. No one had told me. No one had said thank you. I had funded the event where my sister planned to use my name to raise money without knowing it, without consenting to it, without being invited. Something moved in my chest that night, not anger exactly, something quieter, something that had been building for a very long time and had finally found its shape. I booked a drive to Asheville that weekend. Aunt Beverly Crane lived in a small house on the edge of the River Arts District, a 2-story craftsman with window boxes full of late-season herbs and a porch that looked out over the French Broad River. She had retired 5 years earlier after 30 years as a senior accountant at a Fortune 500 firm in Atlanta. She was 71 years old, sharp as she had ever been, and the only person in our family who had ever spoken to me without a filter. She was my father's younger sister. They were close once, less so now. I suspected my father found Beverly inconvenient in the way that honest people are often inconvenient to those who prefer comfortable fictions. She opened the door before I knocked. She'd seen my car pull up. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Come in." She made coffee the way she always did, strong, no sugar, in the ceramic mugs she had bought at a craft fair in Weaverville 12 years ago. We sat at her kitchen table, The window behind her looked out at the river. It was a gray November morning, and the water was the color of slate. I told her everything. The post, the website, the $3,000, the venue, all of it. Beverly listened without interrupting. She had a way of listening that made you feel like every word was being carefully placed somewhere safe. When I finished, she wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me for a long moment. "Arden," she said, "your sister has been telling people you went under for over a year. At Riverside Church's fundraiser last month, I was there. She stood up in front of 200 people and called you a cautionary tale." Her exact words. I didn't move. "She said it like she was sad about it," Beverly continued. "She had that look she gets, the concerned one, like she's carrying a burden on your behalf." She paused. "People believed her. I watched them believe her." I looked down at my coffee. "I didn't know," I said. "I know you didn't." Beverly reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her grip was steady. "You don't owe them your story, Arden. You never did. But you do get to decide who tells it and when." We sat in silence for a moment. Rain had begun to tap against the window above the sink. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. "She has a gala coming up," Beverly said. "April, the Westin Charlotte. I saw the invitation. Someone at my church received one. 300 guests, every major donor and business name in the city." I looked up. Jade told me she's featuring a personal story of struggle close to home as the centerpiece of the evening program, Beverly said. She watched my face carefully. "I think we both know whose story that is." I held my coffee mug with both hands. The ceramic was warm against my palms. I thought about the term sheet in my bag at Thanksgiving. I thought about the 412 likes on Jade's post. I thought about the woman at my science fair who had asked my mother if she was proud and what my mother had talked about instead. I thought about 19 days, about 300 guests, about a stage and a microphone and a room full of people who had been told a story about me that was not true. "I have an idea," I said. Beverly raised an eyebrow. I told her. She was quiet for a long time. Then the corner of her mouth moved just slightly, just enough. "Deliciously perfect," she said. I drove back to Charlotte that Sunday with the windows down, despite the cold. I had 3 months, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was not waiting for anything. The first thing I did when I got back to Charlotte was call my attorney. Her name was Patricia Aldridge. She had an office on Tryon Street in Uptown and had represented 2 of my early investors in their own legal matters. That was how I had found her. She was methodical, unhurried, and the kind of lawyer who never promised outcomes she couldn't deliver. I trusted her completely. I laid out everything: the website, the social media post, the photograph taken without my consent, the fundraising materials that used a thinly veiled version of my personal story to solicit donations from the public. I sent her screenshots. I sent her the links. I sent her a timeline I had put together on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and more calm than I expected to feel. Patricia listened. She asked precise questions. She took notes I could not see. "This is actionable," she said when I finished. "Use of a private individual's likeness and personal narrative for commercial fundraising purposes without consent. We can send a formal cease and desist. We can also request a full accounting of how donations were solicited using this content." "I don't want to file anything yet," I said. "I want to wait." A pause. "Until when?" "Until April 15th. Another pause. Shorter this time. "The gala?" "Yes." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I'll have the letter ready whenever you need it." I thanked her and hung up. The second thing I did was call Marcus Webb, the editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. I had met Marcus at a healthcare technology panel 8 months earlier. We had exchanged cards. He had followed up twice about a potential profile on ClearDose, the kind of story his publication ran occasionally about under-the-radar founders doing significant work in the city. I had declined both times. I called him back now. "I'm ready to talk," I said. He was quiet for exactly 1 second. "When?" "After April 15th. I can hear him processing that. "Is there a reason for that timing?" "There will be," I said. "I'll explain everything when we meet." We scheduled a call for April 16th, the morning after the gala. The third thing I did was register as a platinum donor for Elevate Charlotte's annual spring gala. The donation form was available directly on the organization's website. Platinum level required a minimum contribution of $25,000 and included a reserved table for 8 at the front of the ballroom recognition in the printed program and a verbal acknowledgement from the stage during the evening's proceedings. I selected Platinum. I filled in the donor name as Arden Harmon ClearDose Incorporated. I submitted the payment. The confirmation email arrived 4 minutes later. I read it once. Then I closed my laptop and went back to work. Over the following weeks, I told no one what I had planned. Not June, though. She knew something was different. She mentioned twice that I seemed unusually focused, which from June was practically a compliment. Not any of my team members, not Aunt Beverly, who had already played her part and deserved to be surprised. I simply worked. And I waited. ClearDose had entered a new phase of growth that winter. We were finalizing the terms of our Series B round $8 million from a consortium of 3 healthcare-focused investment firms. The due diligence process was demanding. There were weeks where I worked until 2 a.m, reviewed financial models over breakfast, and took calls during lunch. The team had grown to 23 people. We had expanded our hospital partnerships to include 2 facilities in Virginia and were in preliminary conversations with a third in South Carolina. There were nights, late nights, quiet nights when I sat at my desk after everyone else had gone home and looked at what we had built. The data on my screen, the user numbers, the outcome reports from partner hospitals showing measurable improvements in medication adherence rates, real numbers, real patients, real results. On those nights, sometimes I picked up my phone, not to call anyone, just to look at it, the way you do when you're waiting for something that never comes. My mother had not texted me since November. My father had sent one email in January, a forward of an article about small business tax deductions, no personal message attached. Jade had not contacted me at all. I put my phone face down on the desk and went back to work. 3 weeks before the gala, the formal invitation packet arrived at my home address. A cream envelope, heavy stock, embossed lettering. Inside the official program, the seating chart, a schedule of the evening's events. I was listed in the program under Platinum Donors, Arden Harmon ClearDose Incorporated, in clean serif type second from the top of the list. I was not on the guest list that had been distributed to attendees. That was intentional. On Jade's part, I understood. The donor registration system and the guest list were managed separately. She had never looked at the full donor registry, or if she had not looked carefully enough. I set the program on my kitchen counter and read these through the evening schedule. 7 o'clock, cocktail hour, grand foyer. 7:45 doors, open grand ballroom. 8:15, welcome remarks, Jade Harmon, Executive Director. 8:40, keynote address featured guest speaker. 9:15, A story close to home, personal narrative segment, Jade Harmon. 9:45, donor recognition and closing remarks. I read that line 3 times. A story close to home, 9:15, 45 minutes after the keynote, right before donor recognition. She had built an entire segment around it, a name segment on the printed program, in a room with 300 people. I folded the program carefully and placed it in the folder I had been keeping on my desk since November, the one that contained the screenshots, the attorney correspondence, the timeline, and the confirmation of my platinum donor registration. Then I opened my email and sent a single message to Patricia Aldridge. Please have the letter ready for April 15th. I'll need it that evening. Her reply came within the hour, 3 words. It will be. I closed my laptop. I leaned back in my chair. Through the window of my apartment, the lights of uptown Charlotte reflected off the low clouds in a dull orange glow. The city was quiet. It was almost midnight. I thought about my mother's voice on that phone call in November. Honey, it's not about you specifically. I thought about my father's text on the morning of my graduation, 7 words. I thought about Jade at the Thanksgiving table, tilting her head with patient concern. Not every idea is meant to scale. I thought about the woman at my science fair 22 years ago asking my mother if she was proud. And I thought about what it had cost me, all those years of silence, of needing less, of taking up less space, of celebrating alone in parking lots, of transferring money without being thanked, of building something real while someone else built a story out of my absence. I was not angry. I want to be clear about that. What I felt that night was not anger. It was something much quieter, much more certain. It was the feeling of finally being done, waiting for someone else to tell the truth. The gala was in 19 days. I had everything I needed. The night before the gala, I could not sleep. Not because I was nervous. I want to be precise about that. It was not nervousness that kept me awake until 2 a.m, sitting at my kitchen counter with a glass of water and the city lights outside my window. It was something else, a kind of settling. The way a building makes sounds at night, not because something is wrong, but because the structure is adjusting to its own weight. I had been carrying something for a very long time. And tomorrow I was going to set it down. I went to bed at 2:15. I slept for 5 hours. I woke up before my alarm. I showered. I dressed carefully, a navy dress I had bought 3 days earlier from a boutique on Providence Road. Simple cut clean lines, nothing that announced itself. I wanted to look like exactly what I was. A founder, a professional, someone who belonged in every room she walked into. I ate breakfast alone at my kitchen table. Eggs, coffee, the morning light coming through the east-facing window the way it did every April. I read through my notes one final time. The folder, the attorney letter printed and folded in my bag. The confirmation of my platinum donor registration. Then I called June. I need you to know something, I said, before you hear it from anyone else. I told her everything, not quickly, carefully, the way the story deserved to be told. June listened without interrupting, which for June was extraordinary. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted almost 10 seconds. Arden, she said, finally. Yes. How long have you been sitting on this? Since November. Another silence, then quietly. Do you want me there tonight? I thought about it for a moment. No, I said. This one I need to do alone. Okay. Her voice was steady. Call me after. I drove to the Westin Charlotte at 6:45. The valet line was already forming along West Trade Street. Black cars suited drivers the particular energy of a room that knows it matters. I handed my keys to the attendant, took my claim ticket, and walked through the front doors. The grand foyer was already full. Cocktail hour. The kind of crowd that Jade had spent her entire adult life cultivating nonprofit directors, corporate sponsors, city council members, the names that appeared on the donor walls of every major institution in Charlotte. The room smelled of expensive perfume and catered appetizers and the particular warmth of people who believed they were doing good in the world. I moved through the room slowly. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. I found a spot near the far end of the foyer, partially behind one of the tall floral arrangements, and I waited. I did not have to wait long. Jade appeared at the entrance to the foyer at 7:10, moving through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed this exact entrance. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress. Her hair was down. She shook hands and embraced guests and laughed at the right moments with the fluency of a person who had never once questioned whether she belonged. She had not seen me yet. The floral arrangement was generous. I watched her work the room for 11 minutes. I watched the way she touched people's arms when she laughed, the way she leaned in close when someone spoke, as if their words were the most important thing happening in the building, the way she guided conversations with a subtlety that most people never noticed. She was talented. I had always known that. It would have been easier in some ways if she weren't. Then she found a cluster of guests near the bar. 4 people, expensive suits, the kind of donors who write checks without consulting anyone. I recognized the body language. These were the VIPs, the ones she saved her best material for. I moved closer, not close enough to be seen, close enough to hear. The centerpiece of tonight's program, Jade was saying, is something very personal to me, a story from inside my own family. She lowered her voice just slightly. The intimacy moved the one that makes a crowd of 4 feel like a private conversation. My younger sister, she had so much potential. She really did. Brilliant, technically. But she tried to build a company and it didn't work out. Lost everything. For a while, she was in a very difficult place. One of the men nodded slowly. That must have been hard for your family. It was, Jade said. It still is, honestly. But that's exactly why I do this work. Because I watched someone I love fall apart and not have the support structure she needed. And I thought someone has to build that. Someone has to make sure other women don't go through that alone. She paused. She's doing better now, Jade added. Slowly, but it's a long road. The group murmured with sympathy. One woman pressed her hand to her chest. You're so brave for sharing that, she said. Jade smiled. The modest one, the one that said this is difficult but necessary. I had heard enough. I stepped back from the floral arrangement. I stood in the center of the foyer for a moment, completely still, among 300 people who did not know I was there, and I thought about the balance in my business account. $12,700,000. I thought about the $8 million Series B we had just closed. I thought about 23 employees who came to work every morning, believing in what we were building. I thought about the patients, the real ones, the ones whose names I would never know, who were managing their conditions more effectively because of something my team had built. I thought about my sister's voice. She's doing better now. Slowly, something cracked open inside me then. Not broke, not shattered. Cracked open the way a seed does when it finally has enough warmth and pressure to become what it was always meant to be. I was not a cautionary tale. I was not a long road. I was not someone's inspiration for why the work matters. I was Arden Harmon. I had built something real, and I was done being invisible inside a story that was never true. I reached into my bag. I took out my phone. I typed a message to Patricia Aldridge. Tonight, After donor recognition, I'll find you in the foyer. Then I typed a message to my assistant. Confirm my table. I'm ready. The doors to the grand ballroom opened at 7:45. The crowd began to move. I joined them, unhurried, calm, the navy dress steady against the noise and light of the room. I found table 7, front row, center, directly in sightline of the stage. I sat down. I placed my water glass on the left, my bag on the right, the printed program in front of me. I opened it to page 4, 9:15. A story close to home. Personal narrative segment, Jade Harmon. I folded the program closed. I looked at the stage, the microphone, the podium, the soft spotlight already warming the wood of the floor. I had 19 days to prepare for this moment. I was prepared. What they didn't know was that I had already made my move. Every piece was in place, and there was no going back. Before I tell you what happened in that ballroom, I need to take you back, because the story of what happened on April 14th only makes sense if you understand what was built in the years before it. Not the drama, not the confrontation, the work, the actual unglamorous, relentless work that my family never saw and my sister never asked about. Clear Dose began as a sketch on a whiteboard above my kitchen counter in January of 2019. The core idea was not complicated. Patients with chronic conditions, diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune disorders, are often managing multiple medications simultaneously, each with its own scheduled dosage and interaction profile. The failure rate for medication adherence in this population is staggering. Missed doses, wrong timing, dangerous combinations. It costs the healthcare system billions of dollars every year and costs patients their health in ways that are entirely preventable. I had seen it firsthand. My maternal grandfather had managed 3 chronic conditions in his final years and spent more time confused about his medication schedule than he spent doing anything else. There was no system that worked for him, no platform that integrated with his pharmacy, communicated with his doctors, and gave him simple, clear guidance every single day. He managed with a paper chart taped to the refrigerator. It failed him regularly. I built Clear Dose for him, even though he never lived to see it. The first 8 months were the hardest of my professional life. I was working alone in a 600-square-foot apartment with no funding, no team, and no guarantee that anything I was building would ever matter to anyone. There were weeks when I doubted every decision I had made. Weeks when I opened my laptop at 6 in the morning and sat staring at the screen for 20 minutes before I could make myself begin. I began anyway, every single time. By October of 2019, I had a working prototype. Functional, rough around the edges, but real. I began the process of seeking seed funding, a process that involved 312 cold emails, 41 responses, 19 introductory calls, 7 formal meetings, and 2 term sheets. The first term sheet fell through. The second $300,000 from Meridian Health Ventures in Raleigh, I signed in November of 2019, sitting alone at my kitchen table at 11:30 at night. I didn't call anyone to celebrate. I made a cup of tea. I sat with it for a while. Then I went to bed. 2020 was the year I learned what building actually means. Not the idea, not the funding. The daily accumulation of decisions, corrections, setbacks, and adjustments that no one outside the room ever sees. I hired my first 2 engineers in February. I brought June Okafor on as CFO in March, a decision that turned out to be the best I ever made. June had a mind like a precision instrument. She saw financial risk before it materialized. asked the questions no one else thought to ask, and had an ability to translate complex data into language that investors and hospital administrators could both understand. With June, ClearDose became something different, something better. By the end of 2020, we had a refined product, a small but exceptional team, and our first letter of intent from a hospital network in the Research Triangle. The Series A round closed in early 2021, $2 million, led by a healthcare-focused firm out of Boston. We used it to expand the team, build out our data infrastructure, and begin the clinical partnership process in earnest. The Thanksgiving dinner where Jade told me I hadn't made any real money happened 4 months after the Series A closed. I had not told her. I had not told any of them. And sitting at that table, listening to her careful, practiced concern, I understood something clearly for the first time. It was not an accident that my family didn't know. It was a choice I had made without fully realizing it. A form of self-protection so ingrained it had become invisible to me. I had learned over many years that sharing good news with my family did not produce joy. It produced comparison, redirection, a brief acknowledgement followed by a pivot to Jade. And so I had stopped sharing long before I had anything significant to share. By 2022, ClearDose had partnership agreements with 4 hospital networks across North Carolina and Virginia. Our user base had grown to 62,000 active patients. The outcome data was compelling a 31% improvement in medication adherence rates among our enrolled population, a measurable reduction in hospital readmissions related to medication error. That data was published in a peer-reviewed healthcare journal in the spring of 2022. My name was on the paper. My team's names were on the paper. My family did not know it existed. There were nights that year, late nights after the office had emptied and the city outside had gone quiet, when I sat at my desk and looked at my phone, not to call anyone, just to hold it, to feel the weight of everything I hadn't said to the people who were supposed to be the first ones I called. One night in November of 2022, I received an email notification that our platform had reached 100,000 active users. I read the number 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the desk, looked at the ceiling for a long moment, and felt something I did not have a clean word for. Not sadness exactly, not loneliness, something in between, the particular ache of an achievement that has no one to land on. I turned off the office lights. I drove home. I made dinner alone in my apartment and watched the rain move across the uptown skyline from my window. The Series B closed in January of 2023. $8 million, 3 investment firms, a pre-money valuation that placed ClearDose at $15.4 million. The term sheet arrived on a Wednesday morning. I signed it on Thursday. On Friday, I took my team of 23 people to lunch at a restaurant on North Davidson Street and told them what we had accomplished. They cheered. June cried, which she later denied. I drove home that evening and looked at my phone for a long time. Then I put it in my pocket and took a walk along the greenway by Little Sugar Creek. The January air was cold and clean. The path was mostly empty. I walked for 40 minutes without stopping, hands in my pockets, watching the bare trees against the pale winter sky. I thought about my grandfather's paper chart on the refrigerator. I thought about the 112,000 patients now using a platform I had built in a 600-square-foot apartment with a borrowed laptop and a whiteboard above the kitchen counter. I thought about Jade's social media post. 412 likes. Her resilience even in the face of failure. I thought about what it means to build something in silence, without applause, without acknowledgement. without anyone watching. And I thought for the first time with complete clarity that the silence had not been a loss. It had been a protection, a container, a space in which something real could grow without being diminished by people who did not understand its value. I had needed the quiet, all of it, every invisible year. But the quiet was over now. The gala was in 3 months. Marcus Webb at the Charlotte Business Journal was expecting my call on April 16th. Patricia Aldridge had the cease and desist letter ready. My platinum donor registration was confirmed. Everything I had built, every late night, every cold email, every cup of tea made alone at 11:30 was about to become visible. Not for them, not to prove anything to anyone who had doubted me, but because it was true, and the truth I had finally decided deserved to be told. The Grand Ballroom at the Westin Charlotte seats 320 guests at capacity. That night, every seat was filled. I had been sitting at table 7 for almost an hour before the formal program began. The room around me moved with the particular energy of a well-funded event, the clink of glassware, the low hum of curated conversation, the kind of lighting that makes everyone look like a better version of themselves. Centerpieces of white ranunculus and eucalyptus, programs printed on heavy cream stock, a stage at the front of the room with a single podium, a microphone and a spotlight already warmed and waiting. I ate the dinner that was served. Roasted salmon asparagus, a small bread roll I did not touch. I spoke briefly to the 2 guests seated beside me, a cardiologist from Carolina's Medical Center and a woman who ran a workforce development nonprofit in the University City neighborhood. Both were kind, neither knew who I was. I didn't tell them. At 8:15, Jade walked onto the stage. She looked composed, polished. The burgundy dress caught the spotlight cleanly. She adjusted the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times, looked out at the room, and smiled the warm, inclusive smile that said every person in this room matters to me. The room settled. "Good evening," she said, "and welcome to the 7th annual Elevate Charlotte Spring Gala." Applause, genuine and warm, 300 people who believed in what she had built. I looked at their faces, the open expressions, the leaning forward, the willingness to be moved. They were good people. Most of them. They had come to this room because they wanted to do something meaningful with their resources. That part was real. What they had been told about me was not. Jade spoke for 12 minutes during her welcome remarks. She was a skilled speaker, unhurried, specific, occasionally funny in a way that felt unscripted, even though I suspected every word had been rehearsed. She talked about the organization's growth over 7 years. She cited statistics on women's economic mobility in Mecklenburg County. She named several donors and volunteers by name, each acknowledgement delivered with what appeared to be genuine warmth. She did not look at table 7, or if she did, she had not yet processed what she was seeing. The keynote address followed a 30-minute talk by a woman who had founded a workforce training program in West Charlotte. It was good, honest. I listened to most of it. At 9:11, the keynote ended. The applause was sustained and real. The speaker left the stage. A brief pause, a server refilled water glasses. The room settled back into itself, and then Jade returned to the podium. "Before we move into donor recognition," she said, "I want to share something personal." The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when they sense something unrehearsed is coming, though of course this was entirely rehearsed. I had seen it on the printed program. 9:15, a story close to home. I set down my water glass. I folded my hands on the table. I looked at the stage. Many of you know that the mission of Elevate Charlotte is rooted in real stories, Jade began. Her voice had shifted softer now, more intimate the register she used when she wanted a room of 300 to feel like a conversation between two. Not statistics, not abstractions. Real women, real struggles, real lives. She paused. One of those stories is very close to home for me. It belongs to someone in my own family. I watched her face, the careful grief in it, the practiced vulnerability. She was good at this. I had always known she was good at this. My younger sister, she said, is one of the most brilliant people I know. She had a vision. She worked hard. She sacrificed for years trying to build something she believed in. Another pause, perfectly timed. And it didn't work out. She lost everything she had put into it, and for a long time she struggled quietly, privately, without the support she deserved. Several people in the room nodded. A woman at the table to my left pressed her lips together sympathetically. That's why I built Elevate Charlotte, Jade continued. Because I watched someone I love fall apart and I thought someone has to build the net. Someone has to make sure other women don't land as hard. She looked out at the room. Her story is the reason we are all in this room tonight. The applause began before she finished the sentence. Warm, full, the kind of applause that comes from people who feel they have been given permission to feel something real. I did not clap. I sat with my hands folded on the table and watched my sister accept the response of 300 people for a story that was not hers to tell. Then the MC returned to the podium. And now, he said, we are honored to recognize the generous donors who have made tonight's gala possible. Beginning with our platinum-level contributors, those whose gifts of $25,000 and above represent the cornerstone of everything we do. He looked down at his notes. Our first platinum donor tonight is Hartwell Financial Group, contributing $40,000. Applause. Our second platinum donor contributing $150,000 to Elevate Charlotte, representing Clear Dose Incorporated. He looked up. Arden Harmon. The room took exactly 2 seconds to process the name. Then the applause began. Immediate and full, the kind reserved for the largest gift of the evening, the number that resets the room's understanding of what the night means. I stood up. I was at table 7, front row, center. I was impossible to miss. I watched Jade's face from across the room as I rose from my chair. Her smile did not fall. That would have been too obvious, too readable, and Jade was never obvious. Instead, it froze, held in place by muscle memory and years of practice while something moved behind her eyes that I had never seen there before. Recognition, recalculation, and beneath both of those, something rawer. Fear. My father was seated at a round table near the left side of the room, a guest of the organization, as he had been every year. I had not known he would be there until I spotted him during the cocktail hour. He was looking at me now with an expression I had never seen on his face in 31 years. His mouth was slightly open. His hand had stopped moving on the stem of his wine glass. My mother was beside him. She had both hands flat on the table. She was very still. The applause continued. The cardiologist beside me smiled and said something I did not hear. The woman from the workforce nonprofit touched my arm briefly in congratulation. I nodded. I smiled. I sat back down. The MC finished the donor list. There were 7 platinum donors in total. The combined total of their contributions was announced $418,000. More than any previous year. My contribution alone represented more than a third of that number. Jade stood at the side of the stage during the recognition segment. She was holding her program. Her knuckles, I noticed, were white, When the formal proceedings concluded and the room broke into post-program conversation, she did not come to table 7. She stood near the stage and spoke to guests who approached her, and she was gracious and she was composed, and from across the room she looked like exactly what she had always presented herself to be. But she did not come to me. I waited. I finished my water. I exchanged contact information with the cardiologist who was interested in Clear Dose's hospital integration model and wanted to pass my name to the chief medical officer at Carolina's Medical Center. I thanked him. I meant it. Then at 9:52, Jade walked across the ballroom toward table 7. She moved like someone approaching a conversation she had not prepared for. For the first time in as long as I could remember, my sister looked like she did not know what to say. She stopped in front of my chair. I looked up at her. "Arden," she said. Just my name, nothing else. "Hello, Jade," I said. The room moved around us. Servers cleared plates. Guests gathered their coats. Somewhere near the bar, someone laughed loudly at something. I waited. She said, "I didn't know you were coming." "I know," I said. That was rather the point. Jade stood in front of me for 3 seconds without speaking. That was unusual. In 31 years of knowing my sister, I could count on one hand the number of times she had been at a loss for words. Jade Harmon was a communicator by training and by nature. She filled silence the way other people fill glasses automatically without thinking, because that was simply what you did. But she stood there for 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, I watched something move across her face that she could not quite control. The recalculation, the rapid, invisible reorganization of a narrative that had just been publicly dismantled in front of everyone she had spent 7 years trying to impress. Then the composure returned. It snapped back into place the way a rubber band does fast practiced, and with just enough tension to remind you it had ever been displaced. "Can we talk?" she said. Her voice was low. Somewhere quieter. "We can talk here," I said. "I'm comfortable." Something flickered in her eyes. She glanced around the rooms, the guests still mingling, the servers clearing, the journalist from the Charlotte Business Journal, whom I had spotted earlier near the bar, notepad in hand, speaking with the evening's keynote speaker. Jade had not yet noticed him. Or if she had not connected him to me. She looked back at me. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said. I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. "Tell me about the misunderstanding," I said. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. She placed her program on the table. She folded her hands, a gesture I recognized from every difficult conversation she'd ever managed. The posture of a person who intends to be reasonable. "The content on our website," she began, "and the segment tonight. Those were never meant to be specifically about you. They were composite narratives, stories drawn from multiple experiences. I never used your name. You used my photograph," I said. A pause. "That was a candid photo from a family dinner. I didn't think—" "You didn't ask," I said. "You didn't mention it. You didn't check. You took a photograph of me without my knowledge and placed it next to a description of a failed businesswoman on a public fundraising website. Then you delivered a speech about that woman to 300 people, including my father." Jade's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough. "I was trying to illustrate a point," she said, "about struggle, about the importance of support systems. That's what this organization does, Arden. We help women who are going through difficult—" "I am not going through a difficult time," I said. My voice was level. I had promised myself that tonight I would not raise it. "I have never been going through the difficult time you described. I did not lose everything. I did not move back home. I did not fall apart quietly. None of that was true. And you knew it wasn't true because you never asked. Jade looked at me for a long moment. The composure was holding, but I could see the effort it required. I thought, she started. You assumed, I said, because it was convenient, because a story about your struggling sister made your organization more compelling, more personal, more fundable. I paused. Tonight you raised over $400,000. How much of that came from people who were moved by a story about me that you invented? The word invented landed between us like something dropped from a height. Jade's chin lifted, a small involuntary movement, the defensiveness reflex. That is not fair, she said. Which part? She didn't answer. My father arrived as table 7 before she could find one. He had crossed the room with the deliberate, measured pace of a man who wanted to appear unhurried. My mother was 2 steps behind him, her face arranged into the expression she wore during family arguments. Not distress exactly, but a kind of a watchful caution, the look of someone who has not yet decided which way the room is going to fall. My father placed both hands on the back of the empty chair beside Jade and looked at me. Arden, he said. Dad, this is not the place for this. You keep saying that, I said. You said it at Thanksgiving. You said it at the Capitol Grill. When I tried to tell you about my work, you've been saying it for 31 years. I'm curious, when is the place? Where is it? Because I have been looking for it for a very long time, and I have never found it. My father's expression shifted. The professor faced the one that communicated patient disappointment, the one that said I expected better reasoning from you, faltered for just a moment, just long enough to show that something beneath it was less certain than it appeared. My mother stepped forward. Arden, honey, we just want to... Mom? I said quietly. Did you know that Jade was using my story to raise money? Cor Harmon looked at me, then at Jade, then back at me. She told me it was a general story, my mother said carefully. A composite, she said. Did you see my photograph on the website? A silence. I saw a photograph, my mother said. I thought it was just, I assumed Jade had asked you. She hadn't. My mother looked at Jade. And in that look, brief, unguarded, gone in less than a second, I saw something I had not expected to see. Not complicity, doubt, a genuine, unscripted uncertainty that my mother had not had time to smooth over before I caught it. She had not known. Or she had told herself she didn't know which in my family had always been the same thing. Cora, my father said. A warning or a comfort. I couldn't tell which. I reached into my bag. I took out the envelope and placed it on the table in front of Jade. This is a formal letter from my attorney, I said. It requires Elevate Charlotte to remove all content referencing my likeness, personal narrative, or identifiable details from your website, social media, fundraising materials, and any other public-facing communications within 7 days. It also requests a full accounting of donations solicited using that content. Jade looked at the envelope. She did not touch it. You're going to destroy everything I've built, she said. Her voice was very quiet now. The practiced warmth was gone. What was left was something smaller and more honest. No, I said, I'm not. What you've built stands on its own, the programs, the partnerships, the real work your organization does. None of that requires my story. None of that ever did. I held her gaze. But my name belongs to me. My photograph belongs to me. My life belongs to me. And I'm taking it back. Jade looked at the envelope for a long moment, then she picked it up. She did not say anything else. She stood, straightened her dress, and walked back toward the stage, where several guests were waiting to speak with her. Her posture was perfect. Her pace was measured. From across the room, no one watching her would have known that anything significant had just happened. That was her gift. It had always been her gift. My father cleared his throat. "I didn't know the photograph was there," he said. "If I had known, but you didn't know," I said. "Because you never looked, you never asked, you never wondered what was actually happening in my life, Dad. For years, not once." He stood with his hands on the back of the chair. His face had the quality of a man encountering a truth he had been successfully avoiding for a long time and no longer had the architecture to deflect. "I saw the donor recognition tonight," he said finally. His voice was different, quieter. The professor register was gone. $150,000, Clear Dose Incorporated. "Yes." "How long has that been?" He stopped. Started again. "How long have you been building that?" "6 years," I said. "Since the night after Jade's promotion dinner at the Capitol Grill. While you were giving a 7-minute toast, I was sitting at table 4, deciding to bet everything on an idea I believed in." My father looked at me for a long time. He did not apologize. I had not expected him to. Not tonight. Not here. Apology from Neil Harmon was not a fast process. It required time and solitude and the particular internal pressure of a man who built his identity around being right. But something moved in his face, something genuine and unscripted, and for once entirely unmanaged. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. "That's exactly the problem." I picked up my bag. I stood. My mother reached out and touched my arm. Not a grip, just a touch light and uncertain, the gesture of a woman who wanted to say something and did not yet have the words for it. I looked at her hand on my sleeve. I did not pull away, but I did not stay either. "I'll be in touch," I said to both of them, "through my attorney initially, and then if you're willing to have a real conversation through me." I walked across the grand ballroom toward the exit. The room was thinning now, guests collecting coats and saying their goodbyes. Near the bar, the journalist from the Charlotte Business Journal caught my eye. I nodded once. He nodded back. Tomorrow morning, I would answer every question he had. Tonight, I stepped through the doors of the Westin Charlotte into the April air and stood on West Trade Street for a moment alone with the city around me. The magnolia trees along the sidewalk were in full bloom, white flowers against the dark sky. I looked at them for a long time. Then I called June. She picked up on the second ring. "Well," she said. "It's done," I said. A pause. Then quietly, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. The ballroom behind me, the envelope in Jade's hands, my father's face when he said I didn't know, my mother's hand on my sleeve. "Free," I said. "I feel free." The morning after the gala, I woke up at 6:45 without an alarm. That was unusual for me. I am not by nature a person who wakes easily. Most mornings require 2 alarms and a deliberate act of will. But that morning I opened my eyes, and the room was already light pale April light coming through the gap in the curtains, and I lay there for a moment, listening to the city outside and feeling something I did not immediately have a name for. It took me several minutes to identify it. It was the absence of weight. Not happiness exactly, not triumph. Just the quiet, physical sensation of having put something down that I had been carrying for so long. I had forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. I watched the light move across the floor of my apartment on Commonwealth Avenue and thought about nothing in particular for the first time in months. At 8:30, I called Marcus Webb. He answered immediately. He had been at the gala the night before. I had seen him, and he had seen me, and I knew from the message he had sent at 10:48 the previous evening that he had witnessed enough to understand the shape of the story without needing me to explain the beginning. We spoke for 2 hours. I told him everything: the 6 years of building the seed round, signed alone at 11:30 at night, the Series A, the Series B, the hospital partnerships, the outcome data, the 112,000 patients currently using ClearDose. I told him about the social media post and the photograph and the gala program listing 915 as a story close to home. I told him about Table 7 and the cease and desist letter and the donor recognition. I told him about my grandfather's paper charts taped to the refrigerator. Marcus was a good journalist. He listened more than he spoke. He asked the questions that mattered and did not ask the ones that didn't. When we finished, he said he wanted to run the profile the following Tuesday. Front page of the business section, digital and print. "Is there anything you want kept off the record?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said. "Print it all." The cease and desist was formally delivered to Elevate Charlotte's registered address on the morning of April 16th, the same morning I spoke with Marcus. Patricia Aldridge handled it with the efficiency I had come to expect from her. The letter was precise, legally airtight, and gave the organization 7 days to comply. Jade's attorney responded within 48 hours. The content, the social media post, the website section, the fundraising materials, the photograph was removed within 5 days. No counterclaim was filed. No public statement was issued. The silence from Jade herself was complete. She did not call. She did not text. She did not send an email. In the 10 days that followed the gala, my sister communicated with me exclusively through her attorney, which told me everything I needed to know about where she was in the process of understanding what she had done. I did not chase the conversation. I had said what I needed to say in the grand ballroom on April 14th. The rest was hers to work through on her own timeline if she ever chose to. My father called on a Wednesday evening 9 days after the gala. I was in my office when the call came in. I looked at his name on the screen for a long moment. Then I answered. "Arden." His voice was different from how it had been at the ballroom. The professorial register was gone entirely. What was left was quieter, more uncertain. The voice of a man who had spent 9 days alone with something uncomfortable and had not been able to reason his way out of it. "Dad," I said. A silence. Then I read the article. Marcus's profile had run the previous Tuesday. The headline read, "The Quiet Founder: How Arden Harmon Built ClearDose While Her Family Thought She Was Failing." It had been the most read piece on the Charlotte Business Journal's website for 4 consecutive days. The National Healthcare Trade Publications had picked it up by Wednesday. By Friday, my inbox contained 117 messages from investors, hospital administrators, potential partners, and journalists from publications I had never expected to hear from. Aunt Beverly had sent a single text message the morning it ran. 3 words. "He would have loved this." I knew exactly who she meant. "I read it," my father said again. "All of it." Another pause, the kind that costs something. "I didn't know about the funding rounds. I didn't know about the hospital partnerships. I didn't know about the research publication." He stopped. "I didn't know about any of it." "Nope," I said. "You didn't. Why didn't you tell us?" I had thought about how to answer this question. For 9 days, I had rehearsed several versions of the answer, careful versions, measured versions, versions that were fair to him without being dishonest. In the end, I chose the simplest one, because every time I shared something good with this family, I said, the conversation moved to Jade within 4 minutes. I timed it once at dinner when I was 22. 4 minutes and 11 seconds before someone found a way to connect my news to something Jade had done. I stopped sharing after that. It was easier. The silence on the other end of the line was very long. "That's not something I can argue with," my father said finally. His voice was low. "I'm not going to insult you by trying." It was the most honest thing he had said to me in 31 years. I sat with it for a moment, feeling its weight. "I don't need an apology tonight," I said. "I'm not ready for that conversation yet, but I want you to know that I'm open to having it when we're both ready. When it means something." "Okay," he said. "Okay," I said. We stayed on the line for another minute without speaking. It was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had run out of easy things to say and were not yet ready for the hard ones, but who had for the first time left the door open between them. My mother called 3 days later. She spoke for a long time. About the photograph, about the website, about the things she had told herself to avoid seeing what was directly in front of her. She did not make excuses, or she started to make them twice and then stopped herself, which I thought was more valuable than never starting. At the end of the call, she said, "I'm proud of you, Arden. I should have said that a long time ago. I should have been saying it for years." I did not cry. I had thought I might when this moment finally came. But I sat at my kitchen table in the morning light and felt something quieter than tears, something more durable. "Thank you, Mom," I said. "That matters." 3 months after the gala, the acquisition closed. ClearDose was purchased by Meridian Health Systems, one of the largest integrated healthcare networks in the Southeast, at a valuation of $22 million. I retained 17% equity and continued as Director of Product Development with full operational autonomy over the platform's roadmap. My team of 23 stayed intact, every single one of them. June celebrated by ordering the most expensive bottle of sparkling water on the restaurant menu, which was her idea of extravagance, and I loved her for it. I drove to Asheville the weekend after the deal closed. Aunt Beverly made coffee in the ceramic mugs from Weaverville. We sat on her porch and watched the French Broad River move in the late afternoon light. "Your grandfather would have used it, you know," she said. "ClearDose! He would have had it on his phone within the first week." I smiled. "I know. He always said you were going to build something that mattered." Beverly wrapped both hands around her mug. "He said it when you were 11 years old, after the science fair." I looked at the river for a long time. "I wish he'd seen it," I said. "He did," Beverly said simply. "Just not the way you mean." We sat there until the sun went behind the mountains and the air turned cool. I did not check my phone. I did not think about the next funding round or the next partnership or the next version of the platform. I just sat on that porch with the woman who had always seen me clearly watching the river and felt the particular peace of a person who has finally fully arrived at the life they were always building toward. I am 31 years old. I live alone in an apartment in uptown Charlotte with a kitchen window that faces east and a whiteboard I no longer need to tape above the counter because I now have an actual office with actual walls. My relationship with my parents is not repaired. That is the honest answer. It is in process, tentative, careful, conducted in small increments. My father calls once a week. We talk about work, about the city, occasionally about the past. We are learning a new language with each other. It is slow, but it is real. Jade and I have not spoken since the gala. I do not know if we ever will. That is her choice to make, not mine. I have laid down what I needed to lay down. The door on my side is not locked, but I am not standing at it waiting either. I have stopped waiting for things that may not come. That more than the acquisition or the article or the moment at table 7 is the change that matters most. The one I carry with me every day, the understanding that my worth was never located in their recognition of it. It existed before they saw it. It existed when they didn't. It will exist long after any of this is forgotten. I built something real in the quiet, and the quiet, it turned out, was enough. Your silence is not their permission to write your story. You get to decide who tells it and when. Build in the quiet. Show up when it matters. And never not once let anyone use your struggle as their stage without your consent. That's not bitterness. That's not revenge. That's just knowing what you're worth. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a boundary with family? How did it change your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, check out the video in the description. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.